I was looking for Christmas decorations in my son David's basement when I heard someone coughing behind the furnace. I followed the sound and found a makeshift bedroom with family photos on the nightstand. Then I saw her, my sister Sarah, who supposedly died in a car crash 10 years ago, sitting on a cot wearing the pearl necklace I thought was buried with her. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes and whispered, "Isabella, I'm so sorry. They made me do this." Thanks for being here. Hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where this story found you. My name is Isabella Jones, and what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your very core. Just 3 days ago, I discovered something so impossible, so unthinkable, that I'm still struggling to believe it myself. My sister Sarah, who I buried 10 years ago, who I grieved for, whose grave I visit every month with fresh flowers, is very much alive. And she's been living in my own son's basement this entire time. It was December 23rd, a crisp winter morning in Detroit, the kind of day where your breath forms little clouds and the air bites at your cheeks. I had driven over to my son David's house in my old blue Buick, the same car I've had for 15 years, because I believe in taking care of what you have. David lives in a modest 2-story house on Maple Street, the same house he bought after his promotion at the auto plant 5 years ago. I knocked on the front door, balancing a Tupperware container of my famous sweet potato casserole in one hand and my oversized purse in the other. When David opened the door, something seemed off immediately. His usually warm smile appeared forced, and there were dark circles under his eyes, like he hadn't been sleeping well. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me a quick hug that felt more like a pat on the back. "What brings you by?" "Christmas is in 2 days, baby," I said, stepping into his living room. "I wanted to drop off your favorite casserole and pick up those Christmas decorations I stored in your basement last year. Emily and I are decorating the community center for the Christmas dinner." David's face went pale, actually pale. My son, who never showed fear even as a little boy, looked terrified. "Mom, maybe we should get those decorations another time," he said quickly. "The basement's a mess right now, and I haven't had a chance to organize anything." But I was already heading toward the basement door. I've been going down to David's basement for 5 years, storing holiday decorations, helping him with laundry when Emily was pregnant, organizing his tools. It was never a problem before. "Nonsense," I said, already turning the doorknob. "I know exactly where I put those boxes. It'll just take a minute." "Mom, wait!" David called out, but I was already starting down the wooden stairs. The basement smelled different than I remembered. Instead of the usual musty scent of concrete and old cardboard, there was something else. Something that reminded me of lavender soap and the faint aroma of cooking food. I flipped on the light switch, and the single bare bulb illuminated the familiar space. But everything had changed. Where there used to be neat stacks of storage boxes and David's workshop tools, I now saw something that made my heart skip a beat. In the far corner, behind the old furnace, someone had set up what looked like a small living area. There was a narrow single bed with a colorful quilt I recognized from my mother's house. A small wooden nightstand held a reading lamp, a glass of water, and several framed photographs. I moved closer, my footsteps echoing in the concrete space. The photographs on the nightstand were family pictures, old ones from when Sarah and I were young, pictures of our parents, and even a photo from Sarah's wedding day 35 years ago. My hands began to shake. That's when I heard it, a soft coughing sound coming from behind the furnace. I followed the sound, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. Each step felt like I was walking through thick honey, everything moving in slow motion. As I rounded the corner of the furnace, I saw a figure sitting on the edge of the small bed. It was a woman, thin and frail-looking, wearing a simple blue house dress. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, more gray than black now, but the shape of her face, the way she held her shoulders, the delicate curve of her hands, it was unmistakably familiar. And around her neck, catching the light from the basement bulb, was my grandmother's pearl necklace, the same necklace I had placed around Sarah's neck before we closed her coffin 10 years ago. The woman looked up at me, and our eyes met. Time stopped completely. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Tears immediately filled her eyes and she pressed her hands to her mouth. "Isabella," she said, her voice breaking. "Oh God, Isabella, I'm so sorry." I stood there frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to process what I was seeing. This was impossible, completely impossible. I had been to Sarah's funeral. I had held dirt in my hands and thrown it onto her coffin. I had signed papers. I had received death certificates. I had a copy of the police report from her car accident. "You're dead," I said, the words coming out like a croak. "Sarah, you're dead. You died 10 years ago." She stood up slowly, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone who had been sick for a long time. "Isabella, please let me explain. They made me do this. I never wanted to hurt you." "They?" I managed to say. "Who is they?" Before Sarah could answer, I heard heavy footsteps on the basement stairs. David appeared at the bottom, his face white with panic and something else, guilt. "Mom," he said, his voice shaking, "I can explain everything." But I couldn't hear him anymore. All I could see was my sister Sarah, very much alive, wearing the pearls I thought were buried 6 feet underground. All I could think about was the hundreds of nights I had cried myself to sleep missing her. The monthly visits to Woodlawn Cemetery, where I brought fresh roses to an empty grave. The 10 years of grief, of feeling like half of my heart had been ripped away. I sank into an old folding chair that was sitting nearby, my legs unable to support me anymore. "How?" I whispered. "How is this possible?" Sarah stepped closer, her eyes pleading. "Isabella, I wanted to tell you so many times. Every day for 10 years I wanted to call you, to see you, to hug you. But David said it was too dangerous, that if anyone found out, we'd all go to prison." "Prison?" I looked back and forth between Sarah and David. "Prison for what?" David ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd made since he was a little boy whenever he was in trouble. "Mom, Sarah was dying. The cancer came back, and her medical bills were over $300,000. The insurance company denied her claims. She was going to lose her house, her car, everything. We didn't know what else to do." "So, you faked her death?" The words came out of my mouth, but I couldn't believe I was saying them. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We found a doctor who would falsify the medical records. We staged the car accident. David handled all the insurance paperwork. The life insurance policy paid out $400,000. I stared at both of them, my mind reeling. "And for 10 years, you let me believe my sister was dead? You let me grieve? You let me blame myself for not spending more time with her before the accident?" "We were going to tell you eventually," David said quickly. "After Sarah got better, after the statute of limitations ran out. We just needed more time." "More time?" I stood up, anger finally cutting through the shock. "I have visited your grave every month for 10 years, Sarah. Every month. I have talked to your headstone. I have brought you flowers. I have told you about my life, about David's life, about Emily's pregnancy, about everything you were missing, and you were here? You were alive this whole time?" Sarah was crying harder now, her whole body shaking. "Isabella, I wanted to see you so badly. Sometimes David would tell me stories about your visits to the cemetery, and it broke my heart. But we were in too deep. The lie had gotten too big." I looked around the makeshift basement apartment. There was a small hot plate, some canned goods, a few changes of clothes hanging on a makeshift line. This had been Sarah's world for a decade, hidden away like a secret, like something shameful. "Who else knows?" I asked quietly. David and Sarah exchanged a look. "Just us," David said. "And Dr. Jennifer Lee, who helped with the medical records. And Emily doesn't know anything. I swear, Mom, Emily thinks Sarah is really dead." I felt like the ground beneath my feet was shifting, like everything I thought I knew about my family, about my life, was built on lies. 10 years of lies. "I need to go," I said, moving toward the stairs. "Mom, please," David called after me. "We can figure this out. We can fix this." I turned back to look at them one more time. Sarah, sitting on that small bed in her simple dress, still wearing our grandmother's pearls. David standing there with guilt written all over his face. My family built on a foundation of fraud and deception. Fix this? I said. David, your aunt has been legally dead for 10 years. You've committed insurance fraud. You've falsified death certificates. You've made me an unwitting accomplice to a federal crime. How exactly do you think we're going to fix this? I climbed the basement stairs on shaking legs, my mind spinning with questions. How many other lies had I believed? What else did I not know about my own family? And most importantly, what was I going to do now that I knew the truth? As I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear Sarah calling my name from below, her voice breaking with desperation. Isabella, please don't leave. Please let us explain everything. But I kept walking. I walked through David's living room, past the Christmas tree that Emily had decorated with such care, past the stockings hanging on the mantel with names that now felt like lies. I walked out the front door and got into my blue Buick, my hands trembling so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I drove away from David's house, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw him standing in the doorway, watching me leave. And somewhere in that basement, my sister Sarah, my supposedly dead sister Sarah, was probably crying into the pearl necklace that should have been buried with her body 10 years ago. I had come to pick up Christmas decorations. Instead, I had discovered that my entire understanding of my family was a lie. And tomorrow was Christmas Eve. I spent that entire night sitting in my kitchen, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what I had discovered. How could Sarah be alive? How could David have lied to me for 10 years? But as the hours passed, memories started flooding back. Memories that I had pushed aside because they seemed too painful to examine. Now I realized they weren't painful memories at all. They were clues. It was March 15th, 2014, when I got the phone call that changed everything, or at least everything I thought I knew. I was in my garden, planting spring flowers around my front porch, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number, but his voice sounded strange, shaky, in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom," he said, and I could immediately tell he was crying. "There's been an accident." My heart stopped. "What kind of accident? Is Emily okay? Is the baby okay?" "It's not Emily, Mom. It's Aunt Sarah." I dropped my gardening trowel right there in the dirt. "What happened? Is she hurt?" "Mom, she's gone. Sarah is gone." I remember the world spinning around me. I remember dropping the phone and hearing David's voice calling my name from the ground. I remember my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, rushing over because she heard me screaming. David told me that Sarah had been driving home from her chemotherapy appointment at University Hospital. She had been battling breast cancer for 2 years, and the treatments were getting more aggressive. According to David, she had lost control of her car on Interstate 75 during a rainstorm and crashed into a concrete barrier. The car had caught fire immediately, and by the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left. The police said she died on impact. David had told me that day, his voice breaking. "She didn't suffer, Mom. She didn't feel anything." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? David was my son, my honest, hard-working son, who had never lied to me about anything important in his entire life. When he told me Sarah was dead, I never questioned it for a second. But now, sitting in my kitchen at 3 a.m, I was remembering details that should have made me suspicious. The first strange thing was that I never saw Sarah's body. David had insisted on a closed-casket funeral, saying that the fire had been too severe, that it would be better for everyone to remember Sarah as she was. At the time, I thought he was being protective, sparing me from a traumatic sight. Now I wondered if there had been a body in that casket at all. The second strange thing was how quickly everything happened. Most funerals take at least a week to arrange, especially when there's been a traumatic accident and an investigation. But Sarah's funeral was held just 4 days after the supposed crash. David had handled all the arrangements himself, choosing the funeral home, selecting the casket, even writing the obituary without asking for my input. "I wanted to take care of everything for you, Mom," he had said. You shouldn't have to deal with the details while you're grieving." I had been grateful then. Now I realized he hadn't wanted my input because I might have asked too many questions. The third strange thing was the funeral home itself. David had chosen Morrison Family Funeral Services, a small funeral home on the other side of town. When I asked why he hadn't chosen Patterson & Sons, where we had held services for both our parents, David said that Morrison was more affordable and that Sarah would have wanted us to be practical. I remember walking into Morrison that day, wearing my black dress and the pearl earrings that matched the necklace I planned to bury with Sarah. The funeral director, a thin man with kind eyes, had met us at the door. "Mrs. Jones," he had said, shaking my hand gently, "I'm so sorry for your loss. Your son has told me so much about what a wonderful woman Sarah was." But now I was remembering something odd about that conversation. The funeral director had spoken about Sarah in past tense, yes, but he had never mentioned the car accident. He had never mentioned the fire. He had never offered the typical condolences about sudden tragedy that funeral directors usually give. The fourth strange thing was the pearl necklace. Our grandmother's pearl necklace had been in our family for over 100 years. When our mother died, Sarah and I had agreed that whoever died first would be buried with it, and the survivor would keep our mother's wedding ring. I had brought the pearls to the funeral home and asked the director to place them around Sarah's neck before the service. "Of course," he had said, taking the small velvet box from my hands. "I'll make sure she's wearing them." But he had never asked me to sign any paperwork about the jewelry. He had never given me a receipt. He had never mentioned the standard policies about burying valuable items. He had just taken the box and nodded. Now I was wondering if those pearls had ever made it into that casket, or if they had been set aside for a very different purpose. The fifth strange thing was the guest list. Sarah had lived in Detroit her entire life. She had worked at the same elementary school for 30 years. She had friends from church, neighbors who had known her for decades, former students who still sent her Christmas cards. But at her funeral, there were maybe 20 people in attendance. When I had asked David about it, he said that Sarah had requested a small, private service. But Sarah had never been a private person. She was the woman who threw block parties, who organized church potlucks, who knew everyone's business in the best possible way. A small, private funeral seemed completely out of character for her. The sixth strange thing was David's behavior. My son, who had always been emotional, who cried at movies and graduation ceremonies, was strangely composed throughout the entire funeral. He gave a beautiful eulogy about Sarah's kindness and generosity, but there were no tears. He shook hands with the guests and accepted condolences with a calm that seemed almost unnatural. I had attributed it to shock at the time. Some people handle grief by shutting down emotionally. But now I was realizing that David hadn't been grieving at all. He had been acting. The seventh strange thing was what happened after the funeral. Typically, after a burial, family members stay at the gravesite for a while. They throw dirt into the grave, they say final goodbyes, they take time to process their grief. But at Sarah's burial, David had been eager to leave almost immediately. "Mom, it's starting to rain," he had said, even though the sky was only slightly overcast. "We should get you home before you catch cold." He had practically hustled me away from the gravesite before the funeral home workers had even finished lowering the casket. I never got to throw dirt into the grave. I never got to say a proper goodbye. David had rushed me to his car and driven me home, talking the entire time about how Sarah would want us to focus on moving forward, not dwelling on sadness. The eighth strange thing was the insurance money. 2 weeks after the funeral, David had mentioned that Sarah's life insurance policy would be paying out soon. When I asked about it, he said that Sarah had made him the beneficiary because she knew he would use the money responsibly and take care of any remaining debts. "How much was the policy for?" I had asked. $400,000, David had said. Sarah wanted to make sure there would be enough to cover her medical bills and still have something left over. $400,000. I had been surprised that Sarah had a policy that large. But David explained that she had taken it out when she was first diagnosed with cancer, knowing that the medical bills would be substantial. What I hadn't thought to ask at the time was why Sarah would leave such a large sum to David instead of splitting it between us. We were both her family. We both loved her. But apparently, according to David, Sarah had trusted him to handle the money more than she trusted me. The ninth strange thing was how David's life changed after the insurance payout. Within 6 months of Sarah's death, David had paid off his mortgage, bought a new truck, and started talking about taking Emily on a European vacation. When I commented on his improved financial situation, he said that Sarah's insurance money had allowed him to pay off some debts and get ahead for the first time in his life. Sarah would be happy knowing that her death meant something positive for our family, he had said. At the time, I had thought it was a beautiful sentiment. Now I realized it was a justification for fraud. The 10th and most heartbreaking strange thing was my own behavior. For 10 years, I had visited Woodlawn Cemetery every month. I had brought fresh flowers to Sarah's grave, usually roses because they were her favorites. I had talked to her headstone like she could hear me, telling her about David's promotion, about Emily's pregnancy, about my volunteer work at the community center. But now I was remembering that I had never actually seen them lower Sarah's casket into the ground. David had rushed me away too quickly. I had never watched them fill in the grave. I had never seen the headstone being installed. The first time I visited the cemetery, about a month after the funeral, the grave was already filled in and the headstone was already in place. A simple granite marker that read, Sarah Jones Miller, beloved sister and friend, 1956-2014. For 10 years, I had been talking to an empty grave. As I sat in my kitchen that night, pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The rushed funeral, the closed casket, the strange funeral home, the quick burial, the insurance money, David's unnaturally calm behavior. It all made sense now. But what didn't make sense was why. Why would David put his aunt through 10 years of hiding in a basement? Why would he put me through 10 years of unnecessary grief? Why would he risk federal charges for insurance fraud? I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Linda Adams' number. Linda had been my best friend for over 20 years. She was the one person I could trust with something this big, this impossible. It was almost 4 a.m, but I knew Linda would answer. She had insomnia, and she was always telling me to call her anytime, day or night, if I needed to talk. Isabella? Linda's voice was immediately alert. Honey, what's wrong? Linda, I said, my voice shaking, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe it. Tell me. Sarah is alive. There was a long pause. What do you mean Sarah is alive? I mean she's not dead. She never died. I found her tonight, Linda. She's been living in David's basement for 10 years. Another pause, longer this time. Isabella, honey, I think you need to come over here right now. I spent the rest of the night at Linda's house, telling her everything I had discovered. She made coffee and held my hands while I cried, and by the time the sun came up, we had made a plan. I was going back to David's house, and this time I wasn't leaving until I got the whole truth. Linda offered to come with me, but I knew this was something I had to face alone. This was my family, my son, my sister. The lies they had told were mine to uncover. I arrived at David's house at 8 a.m. on Christmas Eve. I didn't knock. I used the key he had given me years ago for emergencies, and I walked straight into his living room where he was sitting on the couch, still in the same clothes from yesterday, looking like he hadn't slept at all. When he saw me, he jumped up immediately. Mom, thank God you're back. I was so worried about you. Sit down, David, I said, my voice steady and cold. We need to talk. Mom, I know you're upset, but if you just let me explain. I said sit down. The tone in my voice must have reminded him of when he was a child and had broken something important. He sat down immediately, his hands clasped in his lap like a guilty little boy. I remained standing, looking down at him. I want you to tell me everything, David. And I mean everything. No more lies, no more half-truths, no more protecting me from the details. I want to know exactly how you convinced my sister to fake her own death and let me grieve for her for 10 years. David's face crumpled. Mom, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. We never meant for it to go on this long. Start from the beginning, I said. And David, I swear to you, if you lie to me one more time, I will call the police myself. He took a shaky breath. It started with Sarah's cancer coming back. This was early 2014, and the doctors said it was stage 4. She had maybe 6 months to live, and her medical bills were already over $200,000. Why didn't she come to me for help? She tried, Mom. She asked you for a loan to help with the treatment costs, remember? And you told her you didn't have that kind of money. I did remember. Sarah had asked me for $15,000 to help with some medical expenses, and I had told her that my retirement savings weren't enough to cover something that large. I had suggested she apply for financial aid through the hospital. So, that's when you came up with this scheme? David shook his head. Not right away. At first, we tried everything legitimate. Sarah applied for every assistance program available. She set up a GoFundMe page. She tried to negotiate payment plans with the hospital. But nothing was enough. The bills kept coming, and the insurance company kept denying claims. So, you decided insurance fraud was the answer? It wasn't my idea, Mom. It was Sarah's. I stared at him. Sarah suggested faking her own death? She was desperate. She was in pain all the time. She was losing her house, and she felt like a burden to everyone. One day she said to me, David, I have a $400,000 life insurance policy. If I die, at least someone gets some benefit from this nightmare. And you said what? David ran his hands through his hair. At first, I told her not to talk like that, but then she started getting more specific about it. She said that if she was going to die anyway, why not make it look like an accident so the insurance would pay out quickly? And you agreed to this? Not immediately. I thought she was just talking crazy because of the pain medication, but then she started researching it. She found out about other people who had faked their deaths. She learned about what documents would be needed, what kind of accident would be believable, how to make it work. I felt sick to my stomach. So this was planned? For how long? About 6 months. Sarah handled most of the research. She found Dr. Jennifer Lee, who was willing to falsify medical records for money. Dr. Lee was in financial trouble herself. Gambling debts, I think. Sarah paid her $50,000 to create fake death certificates and autopsy reports. $50,000? Where did Sarah get that kind of money? She sold her house to a cash buyer for way under market value. She told you she was downsizing for health reasons, remember? But really, she needed the money to pay for the fake documents and to set up her new identity. I did remember Sarah selling her house quickly and moving into a small apartment. She had said the house was too much work for someone going through chemotherapy. What about the car accident? David's voice got quieter. We found a car in a junkyard that was the same make and model as Sarah's. We paid the junkyard owner to let us stage an accident scene. Sarah left her purse and ID in the car, and then we set it on fire on a remote stretch of highway during a rainstorm. And the body? There was no body, Mom. That's why we insisted on a closed casket. We told the funeral home that the fire was too severe, that there wasn't enough left for viewing. What funeral home would agree to that? Morrison Family Funeral Services was going out of business. The owner, Robert Taylor, was desperate for money. We paid him $20,000 to handle a fake funeral with an empty casket. I stared at David in disbelief. You paid a funeral director to fake my sister's funeral? Pastor Robert Taylor wasn't just the funeral director, Mom. He was also an ordained minister who had lost his congregation when his gambling addiction became public. He needed money, and we needed someone who could make the whole thing look legitimate. So you all conspired together to steal $400,000 from an insurance company. It wasn't supposed to be stealing, Mom. Sarah was really dying. The doctors gave her 6 months to live. We thought she would die naturally within a year, and then the lie would be over. The insurance money would have been paid out anyway, just a little earlier. But Sarah didn't die. David shook his head. The new treatment Dr. Lee recommended actually worked. Sarah's cancer went into remission. But by then, she was legally dead. We had already collected the insurance money. We were in too deep to turn back. So you kept her locked in your basement for 10 years? She wasn't locked up, Mom. She chose to stay hidden. We tried to figure out how to bring her back, but the statute of limitations on insurance fraud is 10 years. We were waiting for it to run out so she could safely return. I felt my anger building. David, do you understand what you put me through? Do you have any idea how much I've suffered thinking my sister was dead? We wanted to tell you, Mom, so many times, but Sarah said it would be too dangerous for you to know. If the insurance company ever investigated, you had to be genuinely ignorant of the fraud. So you protected me by torturing me? It wasn't supposed to be torture. We thought you would grieve for a year or two and then move on. We didn't expect you to visit her grave every month for 10 years. I slapped him, hard, right across the face. David's head snapped to the side and he looked at me with shock and pain. You didn't expect me to grieve my sister? I said, my voice rising. You didn't expect me to miss the person I loved most in this world? What kind of monster do you think I am? Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Where's the money, David? What money? The $400,000 from Sarah's life insurance policy. Where is it? David looked away. It's been spent over the years. Sarah's medical treatments, even with Dr. Lee's help, were expensive. And we had to pay for her living expenses and the people who helped us keep the secret. You spent all of it? Most of it went to Sarah's actual medical care. She still needed chemotherapy, radiation, surgery. Dr. Lee helped us get treatments under a fake identity, but we had to pay cash for everything. And the rest? David was quiet for a long moment. I used some of it to pay off our mortgage and buy the truck, and Emily and I took that vacation to Europe. You took a vacation to Europe with money you stole by making me believe my sister was dead. Mom, I know how it sounds, but we thought Sarah was going to die anyway. We thought we were just borrowing against her life insurance. I stared at my son, this man I had raised, this person I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. David, do you understand that what you've done is not just insurance fraud? You've falsified death certificates. You've filed false police reports. You've committed tax fraud by not reporting the insurance money as income. You've made me an accessory to federal crimes. You're not an accessory, Mom. You didn't know anything. But I know now. And what am I supposed to do with this information? Let my sister continue living like a prisoner in your basement? Pretend this never happened? Or turn in my own son for federal crimes that could put him in prison for 20 years? David started crying then. Real tears, the kind of sobbing I hadn't seen from him since he was a little boy. Mom, please. I know we made mistakes, but we were desperate. Sarah was dying and we didn't know what else to do. You could have come to me for help. You could have told me the truth about Sarah's condition. You could have let me be part of the solution instead of making me part of your lie. We tried to protect you. You tried to protect yourselves. I stood up, looking down at my son, who was still crying like a child. David, I need to talk to Sarah, alone. And then I need to decide what I'm going to do about all of this. What do you mean, what you're going to do? I mean, I'm going to decide whether to call the police or whether to help you figure out a way to fix this mess that doesn't destroy our entire family. David looked up at me with hope in his eyes. You would help us? I don't know yet. But David, if I do help you, it won't be because I forgive you. It will be because Sarah is my sister and I've already lost 10 years with her. I don't want to lose any more. I walked toward the basement stairs, leaving David sitting on the couch, still crying. It was time to hear Sarah's side of this story. It was time to understand how my dying sister had become so desperate that faking her own death seemed like the only solution. And it was time to decide whether love was stronger than justice. I walked down the basement stairs slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. Sarah was sitting exactly where I had left her the day before, on the edge of that small bed, still wearing our grandmother's pearl necklace. But now, in the morning light filtering through a small basement window, I could see her more clearly. She looked older than her years, thin in a way that spoke of illness and worry. Her hair, which had always been her pride, was shorter and streaked with gray, but her eyes were the same warm brown eyes I remembered from our childhood, filled now with tears and something that looked like relief. Isabella, she said softly as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I wasn't sure you would come back. I almost didn't, I said, pulling up the folding chair I had sat in yesterday, But I need to hear your side of this, Sarah. I need to understand how my sister, the woman who taught Sunday school for 20 years, the woman who wouldn't even keep incorrect change from the grocery store, ended up living a lie that destroyed my life for 10 years. Sarah's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, and I could see them shaking. Isabella, I know what we did was wrong. I've known it every single day for 10 years. But I want you to understand how desperate I was, how scared I was when we made this decision. Then help me understand. Sarah took a deep breath. Do you remember when I first told you the cancer had come back? It was February 2014, and we were having lunch at that little cafe downtown, the one with the blue checkered tablecloths. I remembered. Sarah had been picking at her salad, not eating much, and I had thought she looked tired. When she told me the cancer had returned, I had reached across the table and held her hands, promising that everything would be okay. What I didn't tell you that day, Sarah continued, was how bad it really was. The doctors said it was stage 4, metastatic breast cancer that had spread to my liver and bones. They gave me 6 months to live, maybe 8 if I was lucky. Why didn't you tell me how serious it was? Because I knew you would try to fix it, and there was nothing you could do. Isabella, you've always been the strong one, the one who solves problems. But this was a problem that couldn't be solved with determination and hard work. I felt tears starting in my eyes. You should have let me try. I wanted to protect you from watching me die slowly and painfully. I wanted to spare you the months of watching me waste away. That wasn't your choice to make, Sarah. I know that now. But at the time, I thought I was being kind. Tell me about the medical bills. Sarah's face darkened. The treatment plan the oncologist recommended was aggressive and experimental. Chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, immunotherapy drugs that cost $40,000 per treatment. My insurance company approved the first round of treatment, but then they started denying claims. Why? They said the treatments were experimental and not medically necessary. They said that given my prognosis, palliative care would be more appropriate than aggressive treatment. They wanted you to give up and die. That's exactly what they wanted. The insurance company calculated that it would be cheaper to let me die than to pay for treatments that might extend my life by a few months. I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. So, you were stuck between dying from cancer and dying from poverty. Within 4 months, my medical bills were over $200,000. I had to sell my house just to make the minimum payments. I was living in that tiny apartment, spending every day either in chemotherapy or on the phone with billing departments, trying to negotiate payment plans. That's when you asked me for help. Sarah nodded. I asked you for $15,000 to help with 1 month's treatment costs. When you said you couldn't afford it, I realized that even if you helped me, it would just be a drop in the bucket. I was going to bankrupt both of us, and I was still going to die. I should have found a way to help you more. Isabella, you were living on a teacher's pension. $15,000 was probably half of your annual income. I couldn't ask you to destroy your financial security for treatments that probably weren't going to save my life anyway. But you found another way. I found other people who had been in similar situations. Online support groups for people with medical debt. That's where I learned about insurance fraud, about people who had faked their deaths to provide for their families. I stared at her. You researched this online? There are entire communities of people who have been financially destroyed by medical bills. People who have lost their homes, their life savings, their futures because they got sick in America. Some of them talked about extreme measures they had considered or actually taken. And you decided to fake your own death. I decided that if I was going to die anyway, at least the insurance money could help David and his family. $400,000 would pay off their mortgage, secure their future, maybe even help pay for your care when you got older. Sarah, I didn't need you to die for my financial security. But I was dying anyway, Isabella. That's what you have to understand. This wasn't a healthy person faking their death for money. This was a dying person trying to make their death mean something. Except you didn't die. Sarah's voice got quieter. That was the part we didn't plan for. Dr. Jennifer Lee, the oncologist who helped us with the fake documents, also recommended a new experimental treatment that my insurance had denied. She said that if we were going to fake my death anyway, why not try this treatment under a false identity? If it didn't work, I would die naturally and the lie would be over. If it did work, you would be trapped living as a dead person. We thought we could figure it out later. We thought that if the treatment worked and I went into remission, we could find a way to bring me back to life legally. Maybe move to another state, create a new identity, slowly reintroduce me to the family as a distant relative or something. But it didn't work out that way. Nothing worked out the way we planned. The treatment was successful beyond anyone's expectations. My cancer went into complete remission within a year. But by then, we'd already collected the insurance money, filed all the paperwork, held the funeral. Legally, I was dead. Medically, I was healthier than I had been in years. So, you stayed hidden. David and I researched ways to reverse what we had done, but it was impossible. There was no legal way to come back from the dead without admitting to insurance fraud. And the statute of limitations on insurance fraud is 10 years. We decided to wait it out. I looked around the small basement space that had been Sarah's world for a decade. This has been your life for 10 years? Living in hiding, pretending to be dead? It hasn't been as bad as it looks. David and Emily have taken good care of me. I have books, a television, internet access. David brings me news about you, tells me about your life. In some ways, I've felt closer to your life than I did when I was supposedly alive. But you couldn't contact me directly. Every day, Isabella, every single day, I wanted to call you, to see you, to hug you. David would tell me about your visits to the cemetery, about how you would talk to my headstone, and it broke my heart. But we were afraid that if you knew the truth, you wouldn't be able to keep the secret. You're too honest, too moral. We were afraid you would turn us in. Maybe I should have. Maybe you should. Maybe that would have been the right thing to do. Don't you understand what you put me through? The grief, the guilt, the loneliness. I blame myself for not being a better sister. I wondered if you died thinking I didn't love you enough to help you financially. Sarah started crying harder. I know what we did to you was cruel, but Isabella, I was facing a choice between dying slowly and painfully while destroying my family financially, or dying quickly in a way that would provide for the people I loved. But you didn't die. I got a second chance at life that I never expected, but it came with the price of watching you suffer from a distance, knowing that your pain was caused by my choices. I stood up and paced around the small space, trying to process everything Sarah had told me. Do you understand that David used your insurance money for vacations and cars? Do you understand that he profited from your fake death while I cried myself to sleep for 10 years? David told me about the spending. I was angry about that too. The money was supposed to be for emergencies and medical expenses, not for luxuries. Were you angry enough to want to expose the truth? Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I've thought about it many times, especially when David would tell me about your visits to the cemetery, about how much you were suffering. There were nights when I almost called the police myself, just to end the lie. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid of going to prison, afraid of destroying David's life, afraid of what it would do to Emily and their children when they found out, and I was afraid of facing you after what I had done. Are you afraid now? Terrified, but also relieved. Isabella, I have missed you so much. I have missed my sister, my best friend, the person who knew me better than anyone else in the world. I sat back down in the chair and looked at Sarah directly. If I hadn't found you yesterday, how much longer were you planning to keep this up? The statute of limitations runs out in March, 3 months from now. We were planning to figure out how to bring me back then. And you thought I would just accept that? You thought I would be happy to discover that my grief had been a lie? We thought we would tell you that my death had been faked by criminals who wanted to steal my identity, and that I had been held captive all these years. We were going to make David the hero who rescued me. I stared at her in disbelief. Another lie. Even your resurrection was going to be built on lies. We didn't know how else to do it. We had been living the lie for so long that the truth seemed impossible. The truth is always possible, Sarah. It's just harder than lying. You're right. You've always been right about things like that. I reached over and took her hands in mine. They felt exactly like they had when we were children, when Sarah would have nightmares and I would hold her hands until she fell back asleep. Sarah, I need you to understand something. What you and David did was wrong. Not just illegal, but morally wrong. You took away my right to say goodbye to you properly. You took away my right to help you fight your cancer. You took away 10 years of my life that I spent grieving instead of living. I know. But I also need you to understand that I love you. I have loved you every day for 10 years, even when I thought you were dead. And I love you now, sitting here in this basement, even though I'm angrier with you than I've ever been with anyone in my life. What does that mean for us? I squeezed her hands tighter. It means we're going to figure out how to fix this, together. But Sarah, no more lies, no more protecting me from the truth, no more making decisions about my life without including me. If we're going to move forward, it has to be with complete honesty. Even if the truth means David goes to prison? Even if the truth means we all face consequences for what's been done? Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Okay, complete honesty from now on. Good. Now help me understand exactly how big this conspiracy is. Who else knows you're alive, and what is it going to take to make this right? Over the next 3 days, I became a detective in my own family's crime. Sarah had promised complete honesty, and I was determined to uncover every detail of the conspiracy that had stolen 10 years of my life. The first thing I did was call Linda and ask her to help me organize what we knew. Linda had worked as a paralegal for 30 years before retiring, and she understood how to document evidence and build a case. We set up a command center in my dining room with notebooks, timelines, and lists of everyone who had been involved in the fraud. Isabella, Linda said as we spread documents across my table, you need to understand that what you're uncovering here is going to have serious legal consequences. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared for the truth, I said, whatever that means. The second thing I did was confront Dr. Jennifer Lee. I found her office address through Sarah, and I showed up unannounced on December 27th. Dr. Lee was a small, nervous woman in her 50s with graying hair and worried eyes. When I introduced myself as Sarah Jones Miller's sister, her face went white. I don't know what you're talking about, she said immediately. Dr. Lee, I know my sister is alive. I know you helped fake her death certificates and medical records. I know you've been treating her under a false identity for 10 years. What I want to know is how many other patients you've helped fake their deaths. Dr. Lee closed her office door and spoke in a whisper. Mrs. Jones, what you're suggesting is illegal. I could lose my medical license. You should lose your medical license. But right now, I'm more interested in understanding how this worked. How did you falsify Sarah's death certificate? I had connections with someone in the coroner's office who was in financial trouble. We paid him to create official death certificates without actual bodies. It's easier than you think when the system assumes doctors are honest. How much did Sarah pay you? $50,000 initially, and then payments over the years for her ongoing treatment under her false identity. What false identity? Sarah Miller. We created an entire medical history for her as a new patient with a backstory about relocating from another state. And you never felt guilty about taking money from a dying woman? Dr. Lee's voice got defensive. Your sister wasn't the first person to come to me desperate about medical bills. The healthcare system in this country destroys people financially. Sometimes extreme measures are the only option for survival. How many other people have you helped fake their deaths? Dr. Lee was quiet for a long moment. 6, over the past 15 years, all cancer patients facing financial ruin. I felt sick. This wasn't just about Sarah and David. This was part of a larger operation. Are they all still alive? 3 died naturally from their cancers within 2 years. 2 moved to other states with new identities. Sarah is the only one who stayed hidden locally. Dr. Lee, you're going to write down everything you just told me. every name, every date, every payment. And then you're going to decide whether you want to cooperate with authorities or wait for them to find you. The third thing I did was track down Christopher Hall, the insurance investigator. It took some research, but I found out that Metropolitan Life Insurance had assigned Christopher Hall to investigate Sarah's death claim back in 2014. I called his office and made an appointment, telling his secretary that I had information about a fraudulent death claim. Christopher Hall was a serious man in his 40s, with the careful demeanor of someone who investigates lies for a living. When I told him my sister's case, he pulled out a thick file. "Mrs. Jones," he said, "I remember this case. Sarah Jones Miller died in a car accident on Interstate 75, March 2014. We paid out the claim within 6 weeks." Did anything seem suspicious to you at the time? Several things, actually. The accident scene was inconsistent with the type of crash described in the police report. The fire damage was more severe than typical for that type of collision, and the funeral arrangements were handled unusually quickly. Why did you approve the claim if you had suspicions? We had official death certificates, police reports, and medical records. All the paperwork was properly filed and appeared legitimate. Without concrete evidence of fraud, we couldn't deny the claim. What would you do if I told you Sarah was still alive? Christopher Hall leaned forward in his chair. I would ask you for proof, and then I would reopen the investigation immediately. What kind of proof would you need? Medical records showing she's received treatment after her supposed death date. Financial records showing expenditures. Most importantly, physical evidence that she's alive. What if I could provide all of that? Then Metropolitan Life Insurance would pursue criminal charges for fraud, and we would seek full restitution of the $400,000, plus interest and penalties. How much would that total? Approximately $800,000. I felt my stomach drop. Even if Sarah and David wanted to make things right, they couldn't possibly repay that amount. The fourth thing I did was visit Pastor Robert Taylor. Morrison Family Funeral Services was closed permanently, but I tracked down Pastor Taylor to a small apartment complex where he was living on disability benefits. When I knocked on his door, a frail man in his 70s answered. "Pastor Taylor, my name is Isabella Jones. I think you conducted my sister's funeral 10 years ago." His hands immediately started shaking. "I don't conduct funerals anymore. I'm retired." Sarah Jones Miller, March 2014. Closed casket service. Pastor Taylor tried to close the door, but I put my foot in the way. "Pastor, I know the casket was empty. I know you were paid to conduct a fake funeral. What I want to know is whether you understood the consequences of what you were doing. I needed the money. My funeral home was going bankrupt and I had gambling debts. Did you know you were helping commit insurance fraud?" I knew the situation wasn't normal. But the young man, David, he said his aunt wanted to disappear to escape an abusive relationship. He said faking her death was the only way to keep her safe. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. The money would save my business and pay off my debts. Sometimes you believe what you need to believe. Pastor Taylor, that woman was my sister, and I grieved for her for 10 years because of your fake funeral. Do you understand what your choices cost me? Pastor Taylor started crying. I've regretted it every day since. I lost my congregation, my business, my reputation. The guilt has eaten me alive. Good. It should. The fifth thing I did was investigate David's finances. Linda helped me access public records and trace how the insurance money had been spent over the 10 years. What we found was shocking. David had not only spent the $400,000 from Sarah's life insurance, but he had used his improved credit rating to take out additional loans and credit lines. He owed money on the new truck, had credit card debt from the European vacation, and had borrowed against his house for other expenses. Isabella, Linda said, looking at the financial records spread across my table, David is actually in worse financial shape now than he was before the insurance fraud. He spent more than the original $400,000. How is that possible? He used the insurance money to qualify for other loans. Banks saw the large deposit and approved him for credit he couldn't actually afford. He's been living beyond his means for years, thinking Sarah would die naturally and the fraud would never be discovered. How much does he owe total? Between the mortgage, credit cards, car loans, and other debts, probably close to $600,000. So even if he wanted to repay the insurance money, he couldn't, not even close. The sixth thing I did was confront Emily, David's wife. I asked Emily to meet me for coffee, telling her I wanted to discuss Christmas plans. Emily was a sweet woman in her 30s, hardworking and honest, who clearly had no idea about her husband's crimes. "Emily," I said as we sat in the cafe, "I need to ask you some questions about David's financial situation. Is everything okay, Isabella? You seem worried. When David paid off your mortgage 5 years ago, did you ask where the money came from?" "He said it was from Aunt Sarah's life insurance. She left him as the beneficiary, and he wanted to use the money to secure our family's future." "Did it seem like a lot of money to you?" "It was more than we expected. But David said Sarah had been planning for her death because of the cancer. He said she wanted to make sure we were taken care of." "Emily, what would you say if I told you that Sarah isn't actually dead?" Emily laughed. "What do you mean? Of course she's dead. We went to her funeral." "What if I told you the funeral was fake and Sarah has been living in your basement for 10 years? Emily's smile faded. "Isabella, that's impossible. Why would you say something like that?" "Because it's true." I watched Emily's face change as the reality hit her. "You're serious." "Completely serious." "But that would mean David lied to me. That would mean we've been living on stolen money. That would mean our entire marriage is built on fraud." "I'm afraid that's exactly what it means." Emily started crying right there in the cafe. "Isabella, I swear to you, I didn't know. I never would have agreed to something like that. I thought Sarah was really dead." "I believe you, Emily. But now that you know the truth, what are you going to do?" "I don't know. I have to think about our children, about their future. If David goes to prison, what happens to our family?" That's the question we all have to answer. By December 30th, I had uncovered the full scope of the conspiracy. Sarah's fake death involved at least 6 people: David, Dr. Jennifer Lee, Pastor Robert Taylor, a corrupt coroner's office employee, and potentially others. The financial fraud totaled nearly $1 million when including interest and penalties, and the legal consequences could include federal charges carrying prison sentences of up to 20 years. I sat in my living room that evening, surrounded by evidence of my family's crimes, trying to decide what to do next. I had 3 choices: report everything to the authorities and watch my family be destroyed, help them cover it up and become an accessory to their crimes, or find a third option that somehow balanced justice with mercy. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed David's number. "Mom," he said, his voice panicked, "we have a problem. Detective Susan Davis from the Fraud Division just called. Someone has reported Sarah's insurance claim as potentially fraudulent. They're reopening the investigation." "Someone reported it? Who?" "I don't know, but Mom, they want to interview you tomorrow. They're asking questions about Sarah's funeral, about whether you ever had any suspicions that something wasn't right." I looked around my living room at all the evidence I had gathered. Someone else was investigating my family's fraud. The decision about what to do next might not be mine to make anymore. I arrived at the police station the next morning carrying a thick folder containing all the evidence I had gathered over the past week. Detective Susan Davis was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in insurance fraud cases. She had the kind of direct manner that made it clear she didn't tolerate lies. "Mrs. Jones," she said as we sat down in an interview room, "thank you for coming in. We're reopening the investigation into your sister Sarah Jones Miller's death and life insurance claim. Someone has provided us with information suggesting the claim may have been fraudulent." "What kind of information?" "Anonymous tips claiming your sister may still be alive. Now, I want you to know that we get false reports like this fairly often. Family disputes, ex-spouses seeking revenge, that sort of thing. But we're required to investigate every claim." I looked Detective Davis directly in the eyes. What if the tips were true? Then we would be looking at multiple federal crimes with serious prison sentences for everyone involved. And what if someone came forward voluntarily with information about the fraud? What if they cooperated fully with the investigation? Detective Davis leaned back in her chair. "Mrs. Jones, do you have something you want to tell me?" I opened my folder and placed the first document on the table. "Yes, Detective Davis, I want to tell you everything." For the next 3 hours, I told Detective Davis the complete truth. I showed her the evidence I had gathered, the financial records, the interviews with the co-conspirators, and the photographs I had taken of Sarah's basement living space. I held nothing back. When I finished, Detective Davis was quiet for a long time. "Mrs. Jones," she said finally, "in 20 years of investigating insurance fraud, I have never had a case where a family member discovered the fraud and brought forward this level of evidence voluntarily. What happens now? Now we arrest your son and your sister. We investigate all the co-conspirators you've identified, and we work with the insurance company to determine restitution amounts. And what happens to me? That depends. You were clearly a victim of this fraud, not a participant. But now that you know the truth, your actions moving forward will determine whether you become an accessory after the fact." "What do you mean?" "If you help us arrest your family members and continue to cooperate with the investigation, you'll likely face no charges. If you warn them or help them evade arrest, you'll be charged as an accomplice." I nodded. "I understand." "Mrs. Jones, I have to ask, why are you doing this? Why are you turning in your own family?" I thought about that question for a moment, because my sister and my son thought they could protect me by lying to me. They thought love meant making decisions for me, keeping me ignorant, treating me like I was too weak to handle the truth. But real love means trusting someone with the truth, even when it's painful. They didn't trust me with their crisis 10 years ago, and they didn't trust me with their secret. I'm not going to make the same mistake. I'm trusting you with the truth because it's the right thing to do." Detective Davis smiled slightly. "That's the most honest answer I've ever gotten in an interview room." "What happens next?" "We coordinate the arrests for tomorrow morning. Your son and sister will be taken into custody simultaneously so neither can warn the other. Do you want to be present when we arrest them?" "No, but I want to see Sarah before you arrest her. I want to say goodbye properly this time." That afternoon, I went to David's house one last time. David was at work, and Emily had taken the children to her mother's house after our conversation. I used my key to let myself in and went straight to the basement. Sarah was sitting on her bed, reading a book. When she saw me, she smiled with the same warm smile I remembered from our childhood. "Isabella," she said, I was hoping you would come back." "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." "Okay." "Tomorrow morning, the police are going to arrest you and David for insurance fraud. They're going to charge you with multiple federal crimes. You're probably going to prison." Sarah's face went pale, but she didn't interrupt. "I want you to know that I'm the one who provided the evidence that will convict you. I spent the last week investigating what you and David did, and I gave everything I found to Detective Susan Davis this morning." "Isabella," "Let me finish. I turned you in because what you did was wrong, not just to the insurance company, but to me. You stole 10 years of my life. You made me grieve for someone who was sitting in a basement 5 miles away. You made decisions about my life without including me, and you justified it by saying you were protecting me." Sarah started crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I know you are. And I know you were desperate and scared when you made this choice. But Sarah, being desperate doesn't make fraud legal. Being scared doesn't make lying to your family acceptable. And being sorry doesn't undo 10 years of consequences. What's going to happen to us? You're going to face the legal consequences of your actions. David is probably looking at 10 to 20 years in federal prison. You might get a lighter sentence because of your medical situation, but you're still going to serve time. And what about you? I'm going to rebuild my life based on truth instead of lies. I'm going to grieve for the 10 years we lost, and then I'm going to figure out how to move forward. Isabella, do you hate me?" I sat down beside her on the bed and took her hands in mine. "No, Sarah, I love you. I have always loved you, and I will always love you. But love doesn't mean protecting someone from the consequences of their actions. Love means caring enough to hold someone accountable when they make terrible choices. Will you visit me in prison? Yes. When you're ready to face the truth about what you did, when you're ready to take responsibility without making excuses, I'll be there. What about David's family? What about Emily and the children? Emily is a good woman who was lied to just like I was. She'll probably divorce David, and she'll struggle financially, but she'll survive. She's stronger than you think, and the children will learn that actions have consequences, even when those actions are taken by people they love. Isabella, if I could go back and change things, but you can't. None of us can. We can only decide what to do moving forward with the truth we have now." I hugged my sister for the last time as a free woman. "Sarah, I forgive you for lying to me. I forgive you for stealing those 10 years, but forgiveness doesn't mean there are no consequences. It just means I'm not going to carry anger and hatred in my heart." "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me the chance to face this with dignity. You're my sister. You've always been my sister. That doesn't change even when everything else does." I left David's house and drove straight to Linda's. That evening, we sat on her porch drinking tea and watching the sunset. "Do you think you did the right thing?" Linda asked. "I think I did the only thing I could live with," I said. "Sarah and David made their choice 10 years ago. Today I made mine. What happens now? Now I start living again. For the first time in 10 years, I know the truth about my family. It's a painful truth, but it's real. And I'd rather live with painful truth than comfortable lies." 6 months later, Sarah was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. David received 8 years. Dr. Jennifer Lee lost her medical license and received 5 years. Pastor Robert Taylor received probation due to his age and health. Emily divorced David and moved back in with her parents. She started working as a nurse and slowly rebuilt her life. The children struggled with their father's absence, but they were resilient, and Emily made sure they understood the difference between loving someone and excusing their behavior. Sarah and I correspond regularly through letters. She's participating in a prison program that helps inmates get their GEDs, even though she already has a college degree. She says it gives her something productive to focus on. In her letters, she never makes excuses for what she did, and she never asks me to advocate for early release. She's finally taking full responsibility for her choices. David writes to me occasionally, but his letters are full of self-pity and blame. He blames the healthcare system, he blames the insurance companies, he blames everyone except himself. I write back with short, polite responses, but I don't visit him. He hasn't learned the lesson that Sarah has learned about accountability. As for me, I've started living the life I should have been living all along. I volunteer at a cancer support center, helping families navigate the financial aspects of serious illness. I've started dating a kind man named Robert, who I met at the community center. I travel more, I laugh more, and I sleep better at night knowing that my life is built on truth. The hardest part is visiting the cemetery. Sarah's headstone is still there, but now I know it marks an empty grave. I've asked the cemetery to remove it, but they need legal documentation that could complicate Sarah's case. So for now, it remains, a monument to a decade of lies. But I don't visit it anymore. Instead, I've created a small garden in my backyard where I go to remember the sister I lost to cancer and the 10 years I lost to deception. I plant roses there, Sarah's favorites, and I talk to them about forgiveness, about truth, and about the difference between love and enabling. People ask me if I regret turning in my family. The answer is no. I regret that they put themselves in a position where turning them in was necessary. I regret the choices they made that led to this outcome. But I don't regret choosing truth over comfortable lies. Because here's what I learned from this experience. Real love doesn't protect people from the consequences of their actions. Real love holds people accountable because it believes they're capable of doing better. Real love trusts people with the truth, even when the truth is painful. Sarah is alive, and for the first time in 10 years, I know exactly where she is and how she's doing. She's paying for her mistakes, but she's also learning from them. David is alive too, though he's not learning as much as I'd hoped, and I'm alive in a way I haven't been since 2014. I'm living in truth instead of lies, in reality instead of deception. It's harder, but it's real. And real, even when it's painful, is always better than fake. Thanks for staying with me through this incredible journey. If you were in my position, what would you have done? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support means everything to me, so please like this video and subscribe for more stories where truth meets justice. Take care of yourselves, and remember that love without accountability isn't really love at all.